Hey guys, welcome back to Fiction Flux. Hope you're all doing well. Now let's get into it. Nobody warned Himiko Toga that some people could make you feel like the most normal person in the world just by sitting next to you. Nobody warned her because nobody in her life had ever done it. Until a Tuesday in October when everything changed, and she didn't even notice it changing because the most significant shifts never announced themselves, and this one arrived wearing a green hoodie and carrying way too many notebooks and eating convenience store takoyaki like it was the most serious task of the afternoon. But let's not start there. Let's start where every real story starts. With the thing that happened before. Himiko Toga was 14 years old the first time she understood that the way she loved things was wrong. Not wrong in the way that the therapy sessions and the school counselors, and eventually the commission's evaluation team would describe it. Wrong in the specific quiet way that you understood something was wrong about yourself when you watched other people do the same thing differently and realized the gap between how you did it and how they did it was not a small adjustment. It was a canyon. She loved a boy in her class. Not the way her classmates loved boys, the managed, careful, socially calibrated version that stayed inside the acceptable lines and expressed itself through giggles and notes, and the deliberate performance of feeling just enough to be cute without being threatening. She loved him the way she loved everything. Completely. All the way turned up. With the total present tense investment she brought to everything she found genuinely interesting, the stray cats she fed on the way to school, the specific quality of light on water in the early morning, the way certain words felt in her mouth when she said them out loud just to hear them. She loved him the way you loved something when you had no mechanism for half measures. His blood was interesting to her, that was part of it. Her quirk responded to blood the way some people's quirks responded to heat or electricity, with the specific activation energy of something that was fundamentally part of what she was. The blood was real. The fascination was real. So was the love. Both things simultaneously. The world did not have a category for both things simultaneously. The world had categories for the love and categories for the blood fascination, and both categories in isolation were manageable. Both categories together in the same girl with the same face doing the same action produced something the world categorized as monster. She was not a monster. She was a 14-year-old girl who loved too completely in a world that only had space for partial love. But by the time anyone could have told her that she was already running. And the running had been going on long enough that running felt like who she was. She joined the League at 15. Not because she believed in Shigaraki's mission, not because she was ideologically committed to the destruction of the hero system, because the League was the first place that did not ask her to be less than she was. That was the whole reason. That was all of it. They did not ask her to turn the volume down. She stayed. She was 17 when she first saw Izumi Midoriya. Not in person, on a screen. The sports festival broadcast that the League had been watching because the sports festival was the most efficient annual intelligence collection opportunity in the hero world, new talent, power assessment, personality profiles, running in real time for a national audience. She had been half watching. And then something on the screen made her fully watch. Not the fight, the moment after the fight. The moment when the green-haired girl had won something difficult in a way that had clearly cost her significantly, and was standing in the aftermath of the cost, and someone from the crowd was calling out something, and she turned, and her face did. It did the thing. The thing that Toga had been looking for in faces her entire life, and had almost never found. The thing where the face was completely occupied by what it was feeling rather than what it wanted the watcher to think it was feeling. Complete, unmanaged, all the way present in the emotion rather than one step removed from it, performing the emotion for consumption. Toga sat forward. She said, "Who is that?" Dabai, not looking up from whatever he was reading, said, "Midoriya Izumi, one for all inheritor. Surveillance file is on the third shelf." She got the file. She read it twice. She read it a third time slowly. She said she cried at the opening ceremony. Dabai said, "Yes, it's noted." She said actual tears, not for anyone watching. The cameras caught her from the side, she was just actually moved. Dabai said, "Apparently." She said, "That's." She did not finish the sentence. She put the file back. She sat in her chair and thought about the face doing the thing and the actual tears, when no one was watching, and the way the file described her analytical approach as thorough to the point of obsessive, and the notebooks that were apparently numerous enough to be a notable characteristic. She thought, this is a person who is all the way in everything she does. She thought, I've been looking for that. She thought, I should stop thinking about this immediately. She thought about it for the next 3 weeks. The first actual meeting was not what she planned. She had not been planning it. She had been in a district on a different errand entirely, fully operational, completely focused, and then she had turned a corner and there she was. Sitting outside a library on the steps eating onigiri and reading something that was clearly not a textbook. The expression was too engaged for a textbook, the specific quality of someone reading something they had chosen rather than something they were required to. And she was alone. And the steps were public. And Toga had been Toga long enough to know that she made decisions quickly when the decision mattered. She sat down on the step above her. Not beside, above, the angle that was present without being intrusive, the angle that said I'm here and you don't have to acknowledge me if you don't want to. Izumi kept reading for a minute. Then she said, without looking up, you've been standing on this block for about 4 minutes trying to decide something. Toga said, how did you know I was there? She said, the shadow changed. And then someone sat down, and the specific quality of how they sat down said deciding to stay, rather than incidentally resting. Toga said, you noticed my shadow. She said, I notice things, it's a documented tendency. Toga said, documented. She said, notebooks, I have a lot. She was still reading. She said, you can stay or go, both are fine. Toga said, you know who I am. She said, yes, I recognized you from the peripheral vision when you were on the block. Toga said, and you kept reading. She said, the chapter was at a good part, and you weren't doing anything except deciding. Toga said, you weren't alarmed. She said, I get alarmed when there's something to be alarmed about. Deciding isn't alarming, it's just deciding. Toga said, I could be dangerous. She finally looked up. The eyes that met Toga's were the specific green that the file had photographed, but photographs did not fully capture. The quality of attention in them was what photographs missed. They were paying attention the way Toga paid attention, fully, actually looking. She said, you could be. Right now you sat down and you're having a conversation with me. She said, one of those things is more immediately relevant than the other. Toga said, you're either very brave or very weird. She said, my classmates would say both. I have a section on it. Toga said, in the notebooks. She said, the notebooks are comprehensive. Toga looked at her. She said, why did you sit down? Toga said, I don't know yet. She said, okay. She went back to reading. Toga sat on the step, and the afternoon did what afternoons did, and the street was ordinary around them. After a while Toga said, what are you reading? She said, a structural analysis of how institutional systems respond to internal contradiction. It sounds boring. It isn't. Toga said, why isn't it? She said, because every institution you've ever encountered has internal contradiction, and the analysis describes why they respond to it the way they do, which explains a lot about why things are the way they are. Toga said, like what things? She said, like why the hero system addresses output rather than causes. Like why the places people fall through stay the places people fall through. Like why the things that should change don't change until they break. Toga said, you're criticizing the hero system. She said, I'm analyzing it. Criticism implies I want it to fail. I want it to be better. Those require different approaches. Toga said, you want it to be better. She said, yes. Toga said, and the League wants it to fail. She said, yes. Toga said, and you think those are different? She said, I think they produce different architectures. One builds something, one clears the space. Both might be necessary, but they're not the same. Toga said, that's not what heroes usually say about villains. She said, I know what heroes usually say. I'm not interested in what heroes usually say. I'm interested in what's accurate. Toga said, and what's accurate? She said that the space between why you're in the League and why I'm in UA is smaller than either system wants it to be. Long pause. Toga said, that's either very smart or very dangerous. She said, probably both. The both things architecture is correct for most real things. Toga said, the both things architecture. She said, the framework that holds two true things simultaneously rather than requiring you to choose which one is more true. Most real things require it. Toga said, like. She said, like the hero system having genuine value and genuine failures. Like the league having real grievances and real damage. Like sitting on library steps with someone whose file I've read and finding the conversation more interesting than the concern. Toga said, you've read my file. She said, I read everyone's file. I have notebooks about everyone's file. She said, yours has a section. Toga said, what does the section say? She said, do you want me to tell you? Toga said, yes. She said, it says the classification system made a fundamental error. It looked at how you love and called it pathology. It didn't ask what would happen if someone met the way you love with something real. Toga was very still. She said, that's not what the file says. She said, that's what my analysis of the file says. The file says something different. The file is wrong. Toga said, you think the system is wrong about me? She said, I think the system is wrong about a lot of people. You specifically, yes. The classification was built on fear of something it didn't understand rather than analysis of what was actually there. Toga said, and what's actually there? She said, someone who is all the way present in whatever she's in. That's not a disorder, that's a capacity. The world just doesn't have a category for it. Toga said, you're. She stopped. She said, I don't have words for what you're doing right now. She said, I have words for everything. I have notebooks. She said, I don't have words for this. Izumi said, that's okay. Words are for documentation. Some things happen before the documentation. Toga said, and then you document them. She said, yes, after. Toga said, you're going to document this. She said, yes. Toga said, what will it say? She said, I don't know yet, I'm still in it. Toga said, and that's okay. She said, being in something before you know what it is the most honest position. The knowing comes after. Toga looked at the street. She looked at the ordinary afternoon, doing its ordinary afternoon things around the specific extraordinary quality of a library step conversation with someone who had read her file and found the system wrong. She said, I have to go. She said, I know. Toga said, this doesn't happen again. She said, okay. Toga said, I mean it. She said, I know. She said it simply, without resistance, without the quality of someone who was agreeing strategically. Just, I know. Toga stood. She looked down at the green hair and the notebooks and the onigiri and the structural analysis text. She said, you're strange. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, I don't mean that badly. Izumi said, I know. Toga walked away. She did not look back. She thought about looking back for the next 4 blocks and did not do it. She went back to the league. She sat in her space. Dabai was across the room. He said, you're somewhere else. She said, I'm here. He said, you're here and somewhere else. She did not answer. She thought about someone who is all the way present in whatever she's in. That's not a disorder, that's a capacity. She thought about that for a long time. She found her again on a Wednesday. She had told herself she wasn't going to. She found her in a different district at a food stall eating yakitori and writing in a notebook simultaneously with the specific quality of someone doing 2 things that were actually one thing for them. The eating and the writing, both part of the same ongoing engagement with being alive and paying attention to it. Toga sat on the stool beside her. Izumi said without looking up, you said this doesn't happen again. Toga said, I changed my mind. She said, okay. She ordered yakitori. She kept writing. Toga ate. After a while she said, what are you writing? She said, notes from yesterday's training, the specific gap in my left side defensive application. I identified it during the session and I'm working out the correction. Toga said, you write about your weaknesses. She said, the weaknesses are where the improvement is. Writing around them doesn't help. Writing about them specifically does. Toga said, most people don't want to look at their weaknesses directly. She said, most people find it uncomfortable. I find it more uncomfortable not to. If the gap is there and I don't document it, I can't address it. If I can't address it, I stay worse than I could be. That costs more than the discomfort of looking directly. Toga said, "You're very pragmatic about yourself." She said, "I try to be accurate about everything, myself included." Toga said, "What does accurate look like about you?" She looked up from the notebook. She said, "It looks like someone who cried at the opening ceremony of UA and would do it again because the ceremony was genuinely moving and pretending it wasn't would be inaccurate." She said, "Someone who has broken her arms so many times that recovery girl knows exactly which ice pack to bring before she asks." She said, "Someone who writes too many notebooks and does not sleep enough and cares about people she has no rational basis for caring about and cannot seem to stop." Toga said, "Cannot seem to stop." She said, "It's a documented limitation. Notebook 14 has a section on it." Toga said, "You document your inability to stop caring about people." She said, "Accurate documentation requires including the things that are inconvenient. The caring is sometimes inconvenient, it's still real." Toga said, "Sometimes caring about people is inconvenient." She said, "Yes." She said it looking at Toga directly. With the full attention. Toga understood what the looking was saying. She said, "This is inconvenient for you." Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "The file and the notebooks and the section." Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "And you're here anyway." Izumi said, "Accurate documentation requires including the things that are inconvenient." Toga said, "So sitting here with me is documentation." She said, "Sitting here with you is real, the documentation comes after." Toga said, "Which means?" She said, "Which means the real thing came first, before the documentation, before the inconvenience, the real thing is primary." Toga said, "The real thing?" She said, "Yes." Toga said, "What is the real thing?" She said, "I told you on the library steps, your file has a section." Toga said, "What does my section say?" She said, "The whole thing or the part that's relevant right now." Toga said, "The part that's relevant right now." She said, "It says that when something is all the way present in whatever it's in, it's either the most dangerous thing in the room or the most valuable thing in the room, depending entirely on what it's present in." Toga said, "And right now?" She said, "Right now you're present in a conversation at a yakitori stall, and that's the most valuable version." Toga looked at her. Izumi looked back. The specific quality of two people who had the same fundamental relationship to presence encountering each other and recognizing it. Toga said, "I'm going to keep finding you." She said, "I know." Toga said, "That's going to be complicated." She said, "Yes." Toga said, "For both of us." She said, "Yes." Toga said, "And you're not going to tell me to stop." She said, "I'm going to document what happens and try to understand it, and probably lose sleep about the inconvenient parts. I'm not going to tell you to stop." Toga said, "Why not?" She said, "Because the capacity you have, the all the way present thing, that's real and it's coming towards something real and telling real things to stop, is one of the most consistently wrong things I've observed in my analysis of institutions and individuals alike." She said, "Also the yakitori is good and you picked a good stall." Toga almost laughed. The almost was close this time. Izumi wrote it down in her notebook immediately. Toga said, "You just wrote that down?" She said, "Yes." Toga said, "The almost laugh." She said, "The almost laugh is documented. It's in the real things category." Toga said, "One notebook entry for an almost laugh." She said, "The almost laugh gets its own line. Things in the real things category get their own lines." Toga said, "How do things get in the real things category?" She said, "They arrive without being performed. That's the only criterion." Toga said, "The almost laugh arrived without being performed." She said, "Yes, I saw it arrive." Toga said, "You were watching." She said, "I always watch, I have notebooks." Toga said, "Yes." She said, "You do." They ate their yakitori. The stall was warm. The evening was ordinary around something that was not ordinary. Toga said, "I'm not going to leave the lake." She said, "I know." Toga said, even with this." She said, "I know." Toga said, "And you're still going to?" She said, "Yes." Toga said, "Why?" She said, because the both things architecture holds. The league is real and this is real, and I don't require you to choose between them to justify this being real. Toga said, you don't require me to choose. She said, no. Toga said, that's not what people usually do. She said, I know what people usually do. Toga said, you keep saying that. She said, it keeps being relevant. Toga said, yes. She said, it does. The stall owner cleared their plates. They sat for another 20 minutes without talking. The not talking had the quality that good silences had, full rather than empty, present rather than awkward. Toga noticed the quality. She said, you're comfortable in the quiet. She said, yes. Toga said, most people aren't. She said, most people haven't spent enough time alone with their notebooks. Notebooks require quiet. Toga said, and you spend a lot of time with your notebooks. She said, I have 26. Toga said, 26 notebooks. She said, they accumulate. Toga said, about what? She said, everything, everyone, the world as it is versus the world as it should be, the gap between those two things, the people who fall through the gap. Toga said, I fell through the gap. She said, yes. Toga said, and I'm in notebook. She said, 18. The classification system error section is the longest section I've written about a specific individual. Toga said, why the longest? She said, because the error is the most significant one I've identified. The cascade effects from misclassifying someone's fundamental nature are enormous. You didn't become what you became because of the quirk. You became what you became because the response to the quirk was wrong. Toga said, that's. She said, accurate. Toga said, uncomfortably. She said, yes, the most accurate things usually are. Toga stood. She said, I'll find you again. Izumi said, I know. Toga said, Wednesday maybe. Izumi said, I'm usually near the park on Wednesdays, after 4. Toga said, you're telling me where to find you. Izumi said, accurate documentation requires complete information. Toga said, this isn't documentation. Izumi said, no. She said, the documentation comes after. Toga stood at the food stall. She looked at the girl with the ink on her fingers, and the 26 notebooks, and the yakitori, and the section that was the longest she had written about a specific individual. She said, you're strange. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, in the good way. Izumi said, that's the nicest classification I've received. Toga walked away. This time she looked back once. Izumi was already writing. The Wednesday meetings became a pattern before either of them named it as one. Patterns that were real tended to establish themselves without announcement. You did not decide to have a pattern. You looked back after some weeks and recognized one had formed. She recognized it in week 6. She was in the park after 4 on a Wednesday, and Toga appeared at the edge of it and walked toward the bench and sat beside her and said, the yakitori stall in the 3rd district changed their source. Izumi said, worse or better? Toga said, worse, significantly. She said, I'll update the documentation. Toga said, you have documentation on the yakitori stalls. She said, the notebooks are comprehensive. Toga said, yes. She said, they are. And they sat, and the pattern continued doing what patterns did, existing, accumulating, becoming the thing itself rather than the thing approaching itself. In week 6, Toga said, why Wednesdays? Izumi said, I have a free period in the afternoon, and the training schedule clears at 3:30, and the park near the 4th district is a good writing location. Toga said, so it's practical. Izumi said, it's also where you've been finding me for 6 weeks. Toga said, because the location works. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, for both of us. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, the pattern works for both of us. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, you noticed that. Izumi said, I notice things, it's documented. Toga said, everything is documented. Izumi said, everything real is documented. Toga said, and this is real. Izumi said, yes. She said it without qualification. without the careful hedging that the situation might have suggested was appropriate. Just yes. Toga said the 6 weeks. Izumi said yes. She said, what does 6 weeks of documentation say? Izumi opened notebook 23 to a section she had bookmarked. She said, it says that the all-the-way present quality is consistent across contexts. Food stalls and parks and the library steps and the rain, the quality is the same in all of them, which means it's not situational, it's foundational. She said, it says that the almost laugh arrived 3 times, and the actual laugh arrived once, and the actual laugh has a different quality than most laughs I've documented, in that it doesn't perform itself for the person who produced it. It just is. She said, it says that the yakitori stall in the 3rd district has been visited twice, and the 2nd visit noted the source quality decrease. Toga said that last one. Izumi said, the notebooks are comprehensive. Toga said, the laugh. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, once. Izumi said, week 3, when I told you about the training incident with the support item. Toga said, the one where it malfunctioned and you. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, that was funny. Izumi said, it was, in retrospect. In the moment it was mostly painful. Toga said, but the way you described it. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, I laughed. Izumi said, yes, you did. Toga said, you were watching. Izumi said, I'm always watching, I have notebooks. Toga said, you document my laughs. Izumi said, the laugh is real, real things get documented. Toga said, how many entries? Izumi said, the actual laugh has 1 entry, the almost laughs have individual entries, there's a subheading. Toga said, I have a laugh subheading. Izumi said, the notebooks are. Toga said, comprehensive, yes. She said, you make me sound like a research subject. Izumi said, you're not a research subject. Toga said, then what am I? Izumi said, you're the person the section is about. Toga said, the section. Izumi said, notebook 18 has a section on the classification error. Notebook 23 has a section on the 6 weeks. They're different sections. Toga said, what's the difference? Izumi said, 18 is analysis, 23 is something else. Toga said, what's something else? Izumi said, I'm still finding the right category. Toga said, you don't have a category. Izumi said, not yet, no. Toga said, that's unusual. Izumi said, yes. She said, for me specifically, yes. Toga looked at her. She said, you can't categorize this. Izumi said, I can describe it, I can document it, I can write about what I observe and what I notice and what the 6 weeks have accumulated. She said, I can't file it neatly. Toga said, because it doesn't file neatly. Izumi said, no, it doesn't. Toga said, and that's okay. Izumi said, it's uncomfortable, and it's okay, both things. Toga said, the both things architecture. Izumi said, it holds for most real things. Toga said, including this. Izumi said, especially this. Toga looked at the park. She said, I told Dabai something was building. Izumi said, what did he say? Toga said, he said he knew. She said, Shigaraki said something too. Izumi said, what did he say? Toga said, he said that when I was all the way in 2 places, something was going to require a choice. Izumi said, is he right? Toga said, he's usually right about those things. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, you're not asking me to choose. Izumi said, no. Toga said, why not? Izumi said, because the choice is yours. Requiring it from outside would make it my choice. That's not how choices work. Toga said, and if I never choose? Izumi said, then we have Wednesdays, and that's what it is. Toga said, that's enough for you. Izumi said, it's what there is. What there is and what's enough aren't always the same question. Toga said, that's honest. Izumi said, I try to be. Toga said, uncomfortably honest. Izumi said, most honest things are uncomfortable. The comfortable version is usually less accurate. Toga said, yes. She said, usually. She said, Izumi. Her name for the first time. Izumi looked up from the notebook. Toga said, the section that doesn't have a category yet. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, I'm going to tell you something and you're going to write it down. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, I've been all the way in 2 places for 6 weeks, and the place that isn't the leg is here, this, you. She said, and I don't know what to do with that. She said, and I'm telling you because the all the way in quality means I can't not tell you. The not telling would be a form of halfway, and I don't do halfway. Izumi wrote while she was still talking, the pen at the slower speed, the processing speed. Toga said, you're writing it. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, right now while I'm saying it. Izumi said, yes. She said, it's going in the section without a category. Toga said, what section title are you giving it? Izumi said, I don't have one yet. Toga said, try. Izumi said, the most real things. She said it quietly. She looked at what she had written. She said, yes. She said, that's the title. The park was very quiet. Toga said, the most real things. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, that's what this is. Izumi said, yes. She said, that's what this has been since the library steps. Toga said, you knew that early. Izumi said, I noticed it early, the knowing took longer. Toga said, and now you know. Izumi said, and now I know. Toga said, what do you know? Izumi said, I know that the section needs a title, and the title is the most real things and you're in it, and the 6 weeks are in it, and the almost laughs and the actual laugh, and the yakitori stall source quality, and all of it belongs under the same heading. She said, and the heading means something I don't have another word for. Toga said, what's the closest word? Izumi said, I'll find it. She kept writing. Toga watched her write. The slower speed. Both of them in the park in the afternoon. Both of them in the most real things. The League's response to the building was not dramatic. This was characteristic of how real things developed inside organizations, not with confrontation and ultimatums, but with the specific quiet pressure of an institution that had noticed something and was deciding what to do with the noticing. Shigaraki said nothing to Toga for 2 weeks after Dabai told him. Then on a Tuesday he said, the Wednesday thing. Toga said, yes. He said, it's been 6 weeks. She said, yes. He said, it's not operational. She said, no. He said, I know, I'm not saying it should be operational. She said, then what are you saying? He said, I'm saying that you've been all the way in 2 places for 6 weeks, and the quality of your attention here has not changed. She said, I'm still here. He said, yes, you are, all the way. He said, and somewhere else all the way too. She said, yes. He said, I know what that costs. She said, what does it cost? He said, I'm asking you. She said, it costs the management of the volume. Usually I don't manage the volume. Usually I'm just all the way in whatever I'm in. The 2 places requires managing the volume of each so they don't collapse into each other. He said, and managing the volume. She said, is not how I'm built. He said, no. He said, you're not built for managing. She said, no. He said, so eventually. She said, yes. He said, eventually the management fails and you have to be all the way in one place. She said, yes. He said, I'm not asking you to choose. She said, I know. He said, but I want you to know that when the management fails and the choice becomes necessary, whatever you choose it's yours. She said, even if I choose. He said, even then. She looked at him. She said, you're. He said, I'm Shigaraki. I'm a lot of things. One of them is someone who understands what it costs to want something the world doesn't have a category for. She said, yes. She said, you do understand that. He said, yes. He said, go to your Wednesday. She went. Week 8 was when it broke open. Not the management failing, something different. She arrived at the park on Wednesday and Izumi was already there and she was different. Not the expression different, the quality different, the specific quality of someone who had been sitting with something for a long time and had just finished sitting with it and was on the other side. Toga sat beside her. She said, "You've been sitting with something." Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "How long?" Izumi said, "Since week 3. Toga said, "Week 3, that's when I actually laughed." Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "The actual laugh is what started the sitting." Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "And now you're done sitting with it." Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "Tell me." Izumi said, "You told me something in week 6, the all the way in 2 places thing." Toga said, "Yes." Izumi said, "You said you told me because the all the way in quality means you can't not tell. The not telling would be halfway." Toga said, "Yes." Izumi said, "I have the same thing, different expression, but the same thing." Toga said, "The notebooks." Izumi said, "The notebooks are how I don't do halfway. Writing it down makes it real. Refusing to write it down makes it possible to pretend it isn't." She said, "I've been refusing to write it down for 5 weeks." Toga said, "Write what down?" Izumi said, "The section title is the most real things." Toga said, "Yes." Izumi said, "And the most real things deserve an accurate entry." Toga said, "What does the accurate entry say?" Izumi said, "It says that I have been in 2 places for 6 weeks too. The league isn't one of them. But the place that isn't the notebooks and the training, and the very responsible hero-in-progress documentation of everything, that place is here." She said, "This, you." She said, "And that's the accurate entry and it's been 5 weeks overdue." Toga said, "You're telling me." Izumi said, "I'm making the documentation accurate." "Yes." Toga said, "That's the Izumi version of telling someone something." Izumi said, "Yes, I know it's unusual." Toga said, "No." She said, "No, it's not unusual." She said, "It's you." She said, "Accurate and documented and honest, and the most uncomfortable thing dressed up as the most practical thing." Izumi said, "That's the most accurate description of how I communicate anything real." Toga said, "Yes." She said, "It is." She said, "Write it down properly." Izumi said, "Yes." She opened the notebook. She wrote week 8, the park, the accurate entry that has been 5 weeks overdue. The section titled The Most Real Things has a new paragraph. She wrote, the new paragraph says that the 2 places phenomenon is bidirectional. Both people and a real thing are in 2 places simultaneously. The league is one of hers. The notebooks and the training are one of mine. And the other place, for both of us, is this. She wrote, this is the most real thing in the notebooks. She wrote, I'm documenting it properly. She wrote, documentation requires accuracy and accuracy requires the full thing, and the full thing is this. She drew stars. She stopped at 7. She looked at 7. She wrote, yes, 7, 1 for each week since the library steps and 1 for the week to come. Toga said, 7. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, you're predicting the week to come. Izumi said, accurate documentation anticipates the direction. Toga said, and the direction? Izumi said, is toward more weeks. Yes. Toga said, that's optimistic. Izumi said, it's accurate, there's a difference. Toga said, tell me the difference. Izumi said, optimism assumes the best outcome. Accuracy documents what the evidence suggests. The evidence suggests more weeks. Toga said, the evidence being. Izumi said, 7 Wednesday meetings, 2 places for both of us, the actual laugh in week 3, the source quality documentation, the section that needed a title, all of it building in one direction. Toga said, one direction. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, forward. Izumi said, yes. She said, together. Toga said, the both things. Izumi said, the both things, yes, the league and this, the notebooks and this, the complicated and the real, all of it. Toga said, the complicated is going to stay complicated. Izumi said, yes. Toga said, I'm not going to suddenly become uncomplicated. Izumi said, I know. Toga said, and you're? Izumi said, I'm writing it down and staying anyway. She said, that's the whole thing. Toga said, yes. She said, "That's everything." Toga said, "Izumi?" She said, "Yes." Toga said, "The most real things." Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "This is one of them." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "The most real one." Toga said, "How many stars for that?" Izumi said, "3 more." She drew them. 10 stars. She looked at 10. She wrote 10 because the 7 weeks and the 3 things, the most real thing and the both things holding and the staying anyway. 10 is right. Toga looked at the 10 stars. She said 10. Izumi said 10. Toga said okay. Izumi said okay. The park held them. The afternoon continued. Both of them in the most real things. All the way in. The choice came in week 11. Not dramatically. Real choices never arrived dramatically. They arrived as the natural consequence of something that had been building long enough that the consequence was inevitable. The league moved on an operation. A large one. The kind that required all available resources and full commitment, and the specific all-the-way-in quality that Toga brought to everything she did. She was supposed to be a central operative. She was supposed to be all the way in the operation. She was standing at the operational staging point on a Tuesday night, and she was thinking about Wednesday. Not strategically, not in the way that the League would have understood as considering the costs and benefits of her participation, in the specific involuntary way that real things occupied your thinking when you were supposed to be thinking about something else. She was thinking about the park, and the notebooks, and the 7 stars that had become 10, and the most real things. She was thinking about Izumi writing at the analysis speed and switching to the processing speed when something mattered, and the difference between those 2 speeds, and what it meant that she could tell them apart. Shigaraki appeared beside her. He said, "You're somewhere else." She said, "I'm here." He said, "The management failed." She said, "Yes." He said, "I wondered when." She said, "I didn't know it would be now." He said, "It's always now. These things are always now when they happen." She said, "Shigaraki." He said, "Yes." She said, "I need to." He said, "Yes." She said, "I'm not." He said, "I know." She said, "The people here, they're real." He said, "Yes." She said, "And I'm." He said, "You're making a choice with full information." She said, "Yes." He said, "That's the only kind of choice that matters." She said, "Shigaraki." He said, "Go." She went. She appeared at the park at 11 at night. Izumi was not there. She sat on the bench anyway. She sat for 40 minutes. She was on her 4th minute of not knowing what she was going to do next when footsteps arrived on the path. She recognized them. Izumi appeared. She was not in uniform. She had clearly been woken up, the specific quality of someone who had received a message and dressed quickly and come. She sat beside her. Not on the other end. Beside. She said, "You're here." Toga said, "Yes." She said, "You left the operation." Toga said, "Yes." She said, "Shigaraki let you." Toga said, "He told me to go." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "He would." Toga said, "You know him." Izumi said, "I have notebooks on everyone." Toga said, "The section." Izumi said, "Yes, he understands the all-the-way-in thing from the inside. He knows what it costs to try to split it." Toga said, "Yes." She said, "He does." Toga said, "I don't know what happens next." Izumi said, "I know." Toga said, "The leg is." Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "The people there are real." Izumi said, "Yes, they are." Toga said, "And I?" Izumi said, "Yes." Toga said, "And this?" Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "This is the most real thing." Toga said, "Yes." She said, "And I'm here." Izumi said, "Yes, you are." She said, "The bench has room." Toga said, "It always does." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "Always." They sat in the park at 11 at night, with the city doing its night things around the bench, and the both things holding the way the both things held when they were built on accurate foundations. Toga said, "Write it down." Izumi was already writing. She said, "What does it say?" Izumi said, "It says that the management failed on a Tuesday night during an operation, and you came to the park, and the bench had room." She said, "And that the most real things sometimes require you to be in one place." She said, "And that one place is here." She said, "And that here is enough." Toga said, "Is it?" Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "Here is everything." Toga said, "Write that." Izumi wrote it. She looked at what she had written. She drew stars. She stopped at 13. She looked at 13. She said, "Yes." She said, 13. She said, "Because the 11 weeks and the management failing, and the bench, and the Tuesday night, and the here is everything." She looked at 13 stars. She said, "Yes." She said, "That's right." Toga looked at the stars. She said, 13. Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "That's a lot of stars for a park bench at 11 at night." She said, "It is." She said, "And it's the right amount." She looked at her. She said, "The both things." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "They're holding." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "Even now." Izumi said, "Especially now." Toga said, "Everything that is." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "All of it at once." Toga said, "All of it." She said, "All the way in." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "All the way in." The park held them. The night continued. The notebooks filled. And two people who had been all the way in two places simultaneously found the one place that held both things at once, and called it the most real thing, and sat in it together, and let the 13 stars be enough. Because 13 earned stars on a park bench at 11 at night was more than enough. It was everything. And that is the complete story of Himiko Toga, who was not broken. Who loved things completely, and found someone who met the complete love with something equally real. Who sat on a park bench 11 weeks in a row and counted stars, and made the choice with full information. Who came to the park at 11 at night with the management failed, and the bench still having room. Who found the one place that held all the way in. Who was there? All the way. In the most real things. In the both things holding. In 13 stars on a Wednesday that became a Tuesday that became the whole thing. No cap, this is the realest love story fiction Flux has ever told. And every notebook proved it. Every single one. If you made it to the very end of this complete story, you are absolutely fiction Flux family, and we see you completely, and we love you for watching all the way through. Please subscribe and hit that like button and share this video with every anime fan you know, because every single share helps us reach more people who love stories like this one. It genuinely means the world to us. Drop in the comments what story you want us to tell next, because we make these for you. See you in the next one.